to our modified version of Refuge this week. I wish we were able to meet, but under the circumstances that we're facing as a country, that's just not possible. But I still want to be able to teach you all this week. It's really weird being in here and talking to a bunch of empty seats, but I do have a brief word for us tonight. Before we get to that, I want you to check out some bad jokes. So let's check that out first. I hope you thought those jokes were at least a little bit funny, but we're going to go ahead and jump into a devotion for tonight. For the next several weeks leading up to Easter, we're going to be talking about some Old Testament stories and Old Testament passages of Scripture that point us to the cross. And the reason we're doing that is we want you to see that God has always had a plan for salvation. And it has started from the beginning of the foundations of the world. There's foreshadowings of Jesus all throughout the Old Testament. And tonight we're going to look at Samson. Samson is one of the most strong people in the Bible. He is the person that when I think about, he's the strongest person in the entire Bible. And tonight we're going to look at a story that kind of captures the end of his life. And when you look at the story of Samson, Samson's strength that he had came from God, but one of the main sources that it came from was his hair. And when you follow the story of Samson throughout Scripture, Samson thought he was so strong that even if he cut his hair, which he was strictly commanded not to do, he would probably still have his strength. I just want us to see tonight how Samson couldn't have been more wrong. So I want to read for us Judges chapter 16, verses 21 through 30 tonight. It says, the Philistines seized Samson and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he was forced to grind grain in the prison. But his hair began to grow back after it had been shaved. Now the Philistine leaders gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon. They rejoiced and said, our God has handed us over our enemy Samson to us. When the people saw him, they praised their God and said, our God has handed over to us our enemy who destroyed our land and who multiplied our dead. When they were in good spirits, they said, bring Samson here to entertain us. So they brought Samson from prison and he entertained them. So they had him stand between the pillars. Samson said to the young man who was leading him by the hand, lead me where I can feel the pillars supporting the temple, so I can lean against them. Now the temple was full of men and women, and all the leaders of the Philistines were there. And about 3,000 men and women were on the roof watching Samson entertain them. He called out to the Lord, Lord God, please remember me. Strengthen me, God, just once more. With one act of vengeance, let me pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars supporting the temple and leaned against them, one on his right and one on the left. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. He pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the leaders and all the people in it. And those he killed at his death were more than those he had killed in his life. Now just a couple of things I want to look at as we look at this passage of Scripture about the end of Samson's life. The first thing I want us to look at tonight is that in his weakest moment of his life, he did the most for God. Now what good sense does that make? Verse 30 tells us that Samson, who was a very strong, very powerful man, killed more people at his death when he was at his weakest than he did during his whole entire life. This is what the Apostle Paul says about this in 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Therefore I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. Did you know that it's when we are at our weakest moments that God is going to be most evident in our lives? It's really crazy with everything that we're facing in our world right now, but maybe this is a time for us to let Jesus shine through us the most. Maybe this is a time for us to be able to be a good, strong, and Christian witness for those around us. It's when we are at our weakest that Christ is the most strongest in our life. Second thing, last thing we're going to look at tonight, is Samson, who was arguably the most physically strong person ever in the Bible, never looked more like Jesus than he did at the weakest moment of his life. If you look at verse 29, where he was about to die, it said, Samson took hold of the two middle pillars supporting the temple and leaned against them, one on his right and one on his left. So in his dying moment, this is what Samson did. Standing between the two pillars, Samson put out his arms and he knocked the pillars out. And when he knocked those pillars out, he knocked the temple down, and everybody in the temple died. Now when Samson stretched his arms out like this, I don't have to tell you tonight that this is a foreshadowing. This is nothing more than a looking forward to the cross. Because when Samson stretched his arms out to knock the temple down, he looked just like our Savior did on the cross. I want something to be on your mind this week. As we're going through all this stuff, some people are really skeptical about all this stuff. Some people are kind of taking it serious. However you fall in that, what are some areas in your life that are weak that you could use others to be able to point them to Jesus? You see, sometimes it's the things that we don't like the most. It's sometimes the things that we are the weakest at that give us the most opportunity to share about Jesus. Samson is a great example of this. Samson loved his power. He loved his strength. But when it was taken from him, he realized in these verses that we just read that God could still use him. And not only was he pointing people to the cross, he was showing us how we are to live in our weakness. And just as Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. I want to challenge you. I want to encourage you. It's not our natural instinct to embrace our weakness. It's not our natural instinct to let that be something we boast about. But the Bible says to boast about that. Because that's how Jesus is really going to get glorified. That's how Jesus is really going to be spread when we take our weaknesses and let Christ shine through them. So I want to encourage you this week to think about what it is that's a weakness in your life and let Jesus Christ shine through that. I want to thank you for tuning in this week. I know this is kind of weird. It's kind of different, a little modified version of Refuge. But I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more details about things that we're going to be doing here at First Baptist with our students in the days and the weeks to come.